This is very exciting. Hi, I'm Dale Peterson, and welcome to the Unsolicited Response Show. This is my September month in review, the ICS Security Month in Review, and I'm actually recording this on September 26th. So if something happens on the 27th through the 30th that I don't have in here, I apologize, but I'm heading to Japan for 2 weeks, and I wanted to get this in the can before I left. 3 stories, as always, and then wins, fails, and predictions. And September was a busy month. I don't know about you, but it just seemed like that starting gun went off. My travel got really busy. A lot of people trying to book things for the rest of the year. Had to say no to a lot of them just because we're also preparing for S4. But it's been fun. It's actually been fun to get out at more asset owner sites and have more of those conversations. And then the U.S. government put out a ton of things in September. So a really busy month. But here's what caught my attention. Maybe not the 3 most important stories, but I think the 3 stories that I have the most comments on. Story number 1, the FERC Notice of Proposed Rulemaking related to the Infrastructure Act of 2021 that required FERC to establish incentive-based rate treatments to encourage investment in cybersecurity. So you could call this the Carrot Act. Instead of the stick of regulation, this is the carrot to say, if you spend this money, we will allow you to increase your rates. And I like that. I think that's actually a good thing. Will it work? Who knows? But why not try it? We've tried so many other things. Why not actually try the carrot? Now, just to get into a little bit more detail on how it works, they're going to create a pre-qualified list of things that utilities can do that would qualify for this carrot, for this ability to increase rate and recover these expenses over the next 5 years. The initial approach that they've kind of discarded was to say, if you're an electric utility and you have something related to a SIP requirement, but is not an entity that's required to meet NERC SIP, if you spend money to implement NERC SIP where it's not required, then that could be something that you could recover the costs on. They've discarded that. They said, no, we don't want to do this. So this new approach is, if you do something above what's regulatory required, because that's very important in this. So you can't get reimbursed for something that you should have been doing anyways to meet a regulatory requirement, NERC SIP or other. But then if you do something that is on this pre-qualified list of things to do, then you potentially could get reimbursed for it. And they had a pre-qualified list. They have 2 things that they're thinking originally to have on this list. The one is related to the Department of Energy CRISP program, which is primarily an information sharing program. You put something on your network, it records things, it anonymizes them and shares them with the Energy ISAC, and then, or the EISAC. And I'm not sure if that's electric or energy, but it shares it with the EISAC, and then that could get shared out with other people participating in CRISP. And then the other one is monitoring, internal monitoring of your systems that's above what's required by NERC SIP. So you see here the real power of the monitoring, the OT monitoring vendors, your Dragos, Nozomi, Clarity, Forescout, Tenable. They have pushed their message so hard that actually both of the things that you could get reimbursed on are directly related to product offerings that they might have. Now, I'm not sure that this is the most wise use of the carrot, but it certainly shows you the power of that marketing message and the lobbying that they've done, or the influence of the companies that they have been working with, their lobbying effort. There probably will be additional things put on this list. Okay, I'm back. So in the request for information, or the NOPR, it says cybersecurity products can include but are not limited to SIEMs, intrusion detection systems, anomaly detection systems, encryption tools, data loss prevention systems, forensics toolkits, incident response tools, imaging tools, network behavior analysis tools, access management systems, configuration management systems, anti-malware tools, user behavioral analytics software, event logging system, and any systems for access control, identification, authentication, and or authorization control. So you see the list there is very broad. The initial two on the pre-qualified list are related to information sharing and monitoring, but I think they envision it being a much broader program. They also talk about the carrot, including increased rate recovery for cybersecurity service, which could be systems installation and maintenance, network admin, asset management, threat and vulnerability management, incident response, training, forensics, network monitoring, data sharing, data recovery, disaster recovery, network restoration, and it just keeps going on and on. So I think that would tell us that the pre-qualified list could be much longer. Again, it would have to be something above and beyond what's required in a regulation. But hopefully it will include more things than just information monitoring and detection. So this is a positive. I think of all the things the government did this month, this was the one that I found most interesting. And quite frankly, it's hard. It's hard to actually keep up with everything the government's doing. I had an article last week that talked about that, and I'm not sure that the government's actually serving us well, but I do like this effort. So that's story number one. Story number two, the Jackson, Mississippi water system. Now, this actually occurred in late August. That's when things started going wrong. That's when they started to not have water pressure or have low water pressure. That's when, even when they had water pressure, the water treatment plant wasn't working and they didn't have drinkable water. This is not the first time this has happened in Jackson, Mississippi. They had a storm in the winter of 2021 where 43,000 people had no water pressure for up to 2 weeks. As someone who had no water pressure at the end of last year for a week and had no drinkable water for 2 months, I can tell you it can be very inconvenient. But once you start expanding that wider region, then it makes much harder to truck in drinkable water like they did for the 1,000 or so people in my area that didn't have water. Now, in this event that happened in August, it was about 2 weeks before all the citizens in Jackson had drinkable water. And they're really at a point where this is going to keep happening over and over again. In fact, they said over the last 2 years, they had 300 boil water notices in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, why is this an ICS cybersecurity story? Well, strictly speaking, it's not. It's a critical infrastructure story. But I think it's a warning to people in ICS security, because oftentimes we react as, why doesn't management listen to us? Why are they not addressing this issue? Well, the fact is they have a lot of issues to address. And the cybersecurity related to critical infrastructure or related to ICS, we're just one of those issues. In fact, I find it funny. I see a lot of surveys and other things where executives are surveyed supposedly on what they consider the biggest risk, and oftentimes cybersecurity is considered the biggest risk. Clearly, if they're saying that, they don't understand their risks because they have much bigger risks. I mean, we just went through COVID. And do you think people were really concerned that the number one concern was cybersecurity when they were trying to figure out how to stay in business with COVID, or with the supply chain, or with their employees being unavailable or lack of employees? There's so many issues that are large that they have to deal with. So we need to come in the ICS security community, we need to come with an understanding that we're just one of the many risks they have to deal with. You can actually flip this. I recently listened to a podcast that Reid Hoffman, who ran LinkedIn and has been involved in Airbnb and a variety of other boards, Microsoft and such. He kind of flipped it when he was looking at growth. He said, one of the big things that boards have to decide is which risk they want to take. Now, he was talking about it from a growth perspective. If they could go after three different things, which one did they want to go after? Because they were all risky, none of them were guaranteed. But Patrick Miller, in his on-ramp discussion about communicating with executives, said that we have to realize that part of the executive's job is to accept risk. In fact, to accept as much risk as they can and still remain profitable and meet the requirements, whether they be regulatory, safety, or other. So their job is not to say, oh, we want to eliminate all risk. Their job is often to say, how much risk can we accept? And what we see in the ICS security world as a risk, almost in all cases, as a security professional, we are going to be upset with the risks that management chooses to take. Now, in some cases, we don't understand how the company works. We don't understand how a certain loss is acceptable to them. They don't want it, but it's acceptable. And especially if it's never happened before, and you say, hey, we could lose $5 million. It's never happened before, but this could happen. They might say, okay, we'll accept that risk. The other case is they're looking at a large number of risks and they may decide to spend money reducing another risk or taking an opportunistic risk like Reid Whiteman, or not Reid Whiteman. He's my friend, ex-employee, Reid Hoffman. That's funny. What Reid Hoffman said in that podcast. So the number 2 story, the Jackson, Mississippi water outage, should be, I guess I'd say, a warning to us. First of all, that we have a lot of problems in our critical infrastructure that go beyond cybersecurity, but also we need to properly consider and, I guess, calibrate when we go to executives and we're talking about risk, that we are not the only risk they're dealing with. And there might be much larger risks, like the critical infrastructure itself is falling apart. So our ability to control it might not be as important as its ability to stay actually in one piece and do its function, even if we're running fine. So that's story number 2. My third and final story is another government program. And this is CISA's request for information on reporting cyber incidents. This came out actually on September 11th. And actually, no, I think the supply chain came out on September 11th. I'm not sure. This came out sometime in September. Again, it is hard to keep up with everything the government's putting out, and I'm not sure this is a positive occurrence. I mean, it's one thing if you're putting out a lot of information on the same thing in different message formats with different media and different approaches. We often say in marketing that we get tired of our own message much before the audience for our message understands it. So you don't want to stop hitting the audience over and over and over again to get your message across. But if you're putting out so many different messages at the same time, it's really hard to get anything done. And you might even say, okay, government, you're putting out all these things. Which one do you really want me to focus on? You can't say all of them. You really can't say all of them. If you'll permit me a slight diversion, this is related to my article last week. One of the things we found out about 15 years ago when we were doing a lot of assessments, we really don't do much anymore. I don't physically connect up to systems. So when I'm doing an assessment now, it's just interview and inspection. But when we were doing that, when we were connecting up and running our scans and stuff, the reports would be very high with issues. And it was too much. Even when we labeled some exposures, others concerns, and others observations, it was still very difficult for an asset owner to decide what to do. And one of them, gave us a big leg up. They suggested how the report could be much more helpful. And we did it for them and continued doing it from that point on. And I'd highly encourage anyone that does assessments to do this. We said in our report, we would identify the top 5 things they should do in 0 to 6 months and the top 5 things they should do in 6 to 18 months. And the way we broke down, we created that list, and the prioritization in those top 5 was by efficient risk reduction, where they would get their maximum risk reduction for the next dollar they spent or the next hour they spent. So this was a very clear roadmap. Do this, then this, then this, then this. And if you get those, and we would scope it so they could get those done in 6 months, and then another list for the next year. Well, I think the government's major failure is that they are telling us to do all these things. They're telling the community to do all these things. It's like, which ones really matter? In September alone, the new stuff that has come out is just overwhelming. When I had my chance to interview Jen Easterly, the CISA director, she said that there's actually one document that's coming out, a draft came out, and I believe the final is going to come out soon, that will prioritize it. But then you would expect the supporting material to all be around those things. Anyways, that's a diversion. Let me go back to this RFI on reporting cyber incidents. When I look at that, and again, it was required by law, I'm not sure it will actually help the asset owners. There's some talk in there about how government resources can be brought to bear and they have expertise, but quite frankly, private industry is much better. They just are. I mean, you notice that people call Mandiant, they call Dragos, they call others to help. They call their ICS vendors. The government just doesn't have the expertise that the private industry has to help deal with incident response. And in quite the opposite, having to report this to the government is a distraction. Now, is it wrong? Well, it's also a distraction to have to report this to the media and other things. It takes you away from actually dealing with the incident. So I don't think it's an overwhelming distraction if they keep the reporting to a minimum. If there is a simple form that they submit and hand in and then just say, government, go away, we'll give you a daily update or whatever you want, but don't have 20 people coming us, don't expect us to give you long, hour-long phone calls every day. We've got work to do to get this thing back and up and running. So hopefully they'll address that. Another thing they talk about in the RFI for reporting cyber incidents is the benefits of information sharing. Now, this is a maybe. I could see where some information could be helpful to others in the industry to help them determine if this attack is something that's affecting them as well. So this case could be made. Now, the downside of this is to make that information sharing information valuable, that increases the reporting requirements because these people need to know what to look for. And that means that the entity that's trying to get back up and running and provide this critical service now has to spend time on information sharing. But I could see that as a maybe. The potential win here would be the actual government response. And I don't mean for the company, but the critical infrastructure is providing a service or a product to the community, to large portions of the nation. So, for example, in the Colonial Pipeline incident, if they knew that the pipeline might be down for this long, then hopefully they would be coming up. The government would have contingency plans that would say, we are going to find ways to get product, oil, gas, liquids, to key facilities through trucks or through some other way. Or we would have, if we knew this could be a problem, we would have put an effort in getting other pipelines and transmission and distribution elements for liquids in place, so we're not so reliant on one vendor. That's more long-term thinking. But that's where I could see the government really needing this information, because they're saying we're going to have to deal with this large impact on the community. And yes, you're going to try to get your system back up and running, but we've got all these contingency plans. So I could see that being very valuable if for some reason an incident was happening that they didn't know about, or if they want to have some view as to when things would be back online again. Now, the truth of this is this is a fait accompli. This is going to happen. There is going to be a reporting requirement. There's no way of stopping this train. The value of it, I think, will be based on what the government does with the information, and if the government is able to limit the intrusion on the asset owner that is trying to recover and trying to deal with the incident. So that's the third story. That's our three stories for the month. Now for predictions, wins, and fails. The win, I already mentioned it. I think the FERC incentive-based model is a win just because it's trying something new. Might not work, might need to be adjusted, but I love it when people try new approaches to long-standing problems. I mean, that's kind of what S4 is all about, creating the future. And if you permit me a bit of a selfish win, for us, it's a real win that in the first 36 hours of S4 being open on September 15th, we got over the 250 ticket number. We're now in ticket block 250 to 500. That's record sales. I'm also very excited that the ICS Village is going to be running the CTF, and that Idaho National Labs is going to be running the SBOM Challenge. I know they're both going to do a great job. So a win for us is just a great kind of kickoff to the S423 season. The fail, and this might not be fair, but I'm going to call it a fail, is Schneider Electric's acquisition of Aviva. They are acquiring the remaining 40% that they didn't own for $27.5 billion. I think this consolidation is really not good for the industry, and especially when it includes consolidation of people like OSI Soft. So OSI Soft was bought by Aviva for $5 billion. So that's part of the $27.5 billion valuation for Aviva that's now getting rolled into Schneider Electric. I just think you get some really great solutions that don't get the focus and attention they deserve. Is it something that, is wrong or is going to stop? I don't think so. We saw it in some of the other spaces. It'll be interesting to see what finally happens with the OT detection market. We've already seen a lot of that get acquired. We'll see probably similar things happen in the SBOM market. But to me, just creating a bigger and bigger Schneider Electric, where we're going to end up with this Schneider Electric, Siemens, Honeywell, just a few big players. I'm not sure that's really good for the ICS or OT security community, but we'll see. I hope it works out for them. And then in terms of a prediction, this month we actually had another government initiative enhancing the security of the software supply chain, which has requirements for SBOMs and software security for federal government purchased computer systems. My prediction is this will speed the availability of SBOMs, that the vendors are going to be required to provide them. They will meet that requirement. They will provide them. So I guess that's a win, getting these SBOMs out there and available. But I also predict that this is just going to be such information overload for the federal government, and it won't have any major impact on .gov security for at least 3 years. In fact, it may degrade government cybersecurity, if you can believe it, due to the allocated effort for non-actionable information. Okay, I'm getting all these S-bombs. I now need to do something. I got to store them all. I got to prove that I have them. I got to prove that I'm checking my vendor, that they're doing all this thing. Well, that effort's got to come from somewhere, which means you can't do other things. So, yeah, it's a little bit like NERC-CIP in the early days. NERC-CIP actually degraded the security programs of people in the electric sector that were actually working on cybersecurity. It brought them down because instead of working on things that were risk-based, they had to meet NERC-CIP compliance. I think we're going to see this as well. So a bit of a win, bit of a fail, but that's my prediction. That one's going to be a little harder to track, but I will try to track it as I do at the end of each year. And with that, I'm going to put the wraps on September as my dog is barking and wants to be let in. I hope you all had a good month and are ready for the last quarter. It's going to be very busy. I will continue to put out podcasts and articles. And as always, if you have anything you want to tell me, you can send it to s4@digitalbond.com or look for me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. That's all for now. And I'll talk to you next time. Something warrants an unsolicited response.